past. Well, inflation this, inflation that, costs are up. Why is my gas costing so much? Why are all these products being so expensive this holiday season? It's all about the economy and everything happening both here in the US and around the world that affects it each and every day. And here to join us once again to talk about what those factors are and how they're affecting the economy is Michael Greiner, assistant professor of management at Oakland University's School of Business Administration. Michael, thanks for being with us today.
It's great to be back, Tyler. I'm actually traveling right now, but I wanted to make sure we didn't miss our weekly talk.
Yeah, good to have you with us. Thanks for coming on the show as you are traveling and out and about at the moment. Let's start off with where we're at in the economy, because it's kind of an interesting spot where the Federal Reserve, of course, has employed its strategy of incremental rising of the interest rates over the course of time to try to counteract inflation. With that, you would expect to see higher costs, which we have still seen for businesses, and maybe fewer jobs because they're trying to cut some of the costs from a labor standpoint. But as it currently stands, U.S. job growth is remaining strong. So A, why is that the case? And then B, how is that further affecting the effectiveness of the Federal Reserve's strategy?
Yeah, we're kind of in a crazy time right now where we're seeing all kinds of different data that you wouldn't expect. And frankly, most economists are pretty confused by the whole thing, including those at the Fed, frankly. We have seen over the past four peer meetings by the Fed rate increases of 0.75%. Which is really a historically fast rate increase that they've instilled on the economy. So that's had an impact, no doubt about it. It's made it more expensive for companies and particularly individuals looking to buy new homes to borrow. And in fact, we've seen where mortgage rates have gone up quite a bit higher than they've been in quite some time. And in some respects, that's good news because it means that that's where we're going to start to see slowdowns in the economy. But by the same token, it's kind of one of those things where good news, bad news situation. On the one hand, yes, the economy is slowing. That means that hopefully we're going to start to see inflation slow down. On the other hand, the economy is slowing, so that means that there are some people losing. It's definitely a tough spot to be in. But this is where it's gotten really interesting. We have received some good news about potentially slowing increases in the cost of real estate. Now, part of the way that the consumer price index is calculated is that they look at not just the rents that renters are paying, tenants are paying for their homes, but where you own a home, they also calculate what's called a owner's effective rent, essentially what the owner would be paying to rent their own home, because they say it's not quite fair to essentially give the owners the benefit of this asset without really showing the benefit that goes to the entire economy as a result of it. So what they do is that they calculate the rents that owners would be paying. And as it turns out of the consumer price index, almost 40% of the total consumer price index is made up of this rent paid both by tenants and by the owners of real estate. So when you see inflation going up, a good portion of that has to do with the fact that rents have been going up. Well, rents, of course, are kind of determined on a long-term basis. Most people, when they rent something, obviously they're paying rent based upon a lease. That lease typically runs for a year. So if you started paying a higher rent a year ago, you're still paying that higher rent. And that's how the Fed is calculating it. The problem is that the market might be going down, but that might not be reflected in the Fed's figures yet. Well, as it turns out, we have another way of calculating how rents are doing, and those are by looking at private entities, organizations like Zillow, for example, or realtors. They will calculate what the current market rent is. And as it turns out, the current market rent is actually going down quite substantially. In fact, there have been a number of calculations that have shown that if the Fed were using the current market rate for rent as opposed to essentially the rolling average of rent that they use that takes into account leases that were signed over the past year, then actually we would already be down to 2% inflation, which is what the target is for the Fed. So that appears to be some good news that we're making progress with inflation. There are also other indications that we're making progress with inflation. The amounts that people are paying over sticker price for new vehicles has actually gone down quite substantially. As you know, that was something that was really affected by the supply chain shortages that we had earlier after the pandemic. And as a result of that, people were paying quite a bit over sticker price for new vehicles. Since that's gone down, then that's also provided some relief then to the used car market, because of course, if people can't afford to buy new cars, then they go to the used car market. And what we've seen, and this is really kind of a good indication of the fact that the supply chain has loosened up quite a bit, is the cost of shipping one of those big containers that you've seen on TV from China to the United States has declined by 90% over the past year. So we're seeing some real loosening up of the supply chain, and that thing that kind of caused a lot of the inflation early on has really loosened up. Part of the issue, though, is that people are switching their spending from goods to services, and this kind of is the mirror image of what we saw as we went into the pandemic, when people switched from spending on services, things like going to the restaurant or going to the gym, to things like goods, like buying groceries and buying Pelotons. We have, of course, all heard the story about Peloton. But now we're dealing with the mirror image of that. And as a result, actually, manufacturing has slowed down. Most retailers are actually dealing with high inventories right now, where they're trying to actually get rid of some of their inventory. They're dealing with a lot less purchasing than they dealt with in prior years as a result of the Christmas season. And they've actually not engaged in the level of hiring that they have in prior years. So you see where there's kind of this mixed bag here. It appears that there are these indications that inflation is slowing down. By the same token, though, one of the biggest drivers of inflation potentially are wage increases, especially when you're dealing with services, because services, a lot of that involves the interaction of one person with another. And so if those employers are paying more for their employees, then they have to charge their customers more for those services. Well, as it turns out, wages have gone up pretty dramatically, surprisingly so, based upon the last report. In fact, the increase was 5.1% over last year, which was really much higher than economists expected. Most economists were expecting somewhere in the threes. So you can see how much higher it was than what was expected. So that kind of runs counter to this narrative that the economy is slowing down, prices are starting to go down. There's still this incredibly high demand for employees that's allowing employees basically to drive up the cost of their labor. And that then ultimately then goes and impacts the people buying things. How this is all going to work out? Well, I mean, it still remains to be seen. The Fed chair has already indicated that this month we're probably only going to see a 0.5% increase in the interest rates. So that's slowing down the rate of increase that we've been seeing over the past 6-8 months or so. That's a good sign. We saw recently the Government Bank of Canada actually decrease the amount that they're increasing their interest rates. So that's a good sign, and kind of shows that there's this growing consensus among economists that maybe interest rates have gone up high enough. We need to see how this is going to affect the economy and let it play out a little bit. But by the same token, the Fed chair, Jerome Powell, has been very clear about the fact that it's premature to declare victory, that until we see clear evidence that inflation will go down, we can still expect to see more raises. So, and we're still in kind of wait and see period that we've been in for so long. There are some good signs, but yet we're not out of the woods yet.
We're joined by Michael Greiner on today's edition of the Megacast, Assistant Professor of Management at Oakland University's School of Business Administration. You can find more information on Oakland University programs in their School of Business Administration and beyond at oakland.edu. That's oakland.edu. Edu for more information. And as we continue to see the impact of inflation on our economy, also having a major impact on economies across the world, and especially in developing nations, that's really impacting them on the forefront of debt. They're collecting more of it, and they're really looking like there's a looming crisis where a lot of these developing countries that have been accumulating this debt, especially in the last several months to a year or so that we've been dealing with this current economic crisis, could be heading toward some issues of potentially defaulting on some of those debts. Tell us about that and how that will seriously affect these countries that are already in some cases in really tough situations, but also how the stronger economies of the world may react in terms of trying to help these nations maintain basic services that could be significantly affected if they default on these loans.
Yeah, we actually saw an
Looks like we're having some technical issues with Michael Greiner. We'll hold up for just a moment here and try to see if we can get him back. As he mentioned, he is traveling. He is out and about, so some technical issues may take place here and there. But again, we're joined by Michael Greiner as we are each and every week for our Friday market talk on Megacast. Join us weekly from 10:25 a.m. until about 10:40, 10:45 on our Friday shows each and every week for an update on the economy and an extensive look into some of these issues that are affecting inflation and affecting other economic issues with our economy here in the U.S. and how that's affecting economies around the world and how that all circles right back here to the U.S. The assistant professor himself comes in each and every week and kind of broadens our horizons on this. Lets us take it from, okay, inflation's super high and we're having issues with this, that, or the other, and really expand further on it. So, Michael, going back to you about those countries that are experiencing a bit of a potentially looming debt crisis, how could that really significantly affect the lives of those in these developing countries, and how maybe will stronger economies of the world, such as the United States, potentially react to that and trying to help these countries maintain basic services if those debt crises come to blows?
Yeah, sorry about that. Seems like we have a little internet hiccup here on my end. But the so anyway, so the world, as we've talked about before, is really interconnected at this point, and most of the debt out there that is incurred by developing countries is denominated in dollars. And as we've talked about before, as a result of these increases in the interest rate, as well as the fact that the U.S. economy, generally speaking, although a lot of people don't seem to really be able to see it, is actually doing relatively well compared to most economies out there. As a result of that, the dollar is very strong. And what that means is that many of these economies suddenly have to be paying back these debts in a dollar that is worth a whole lot of their currency. It becomes more expensive for them essentially to pay back these debts. And a lot of these debts over the past 10 years or so, there's been a shift where more and more of this debt is taken on by these countries with, number one, private lenders, banks essentially, but also by China. China has been very aggressive in going out there and lending to developing countries and trying to essentially extend its economic power and really challenge the United States on that front. The problem for a lot of these countries, though, is where the United States has a history of essentially working with these countries to kind of, if not bail them out, at least try to restructure their debts in a way that they're able to pay them back over time. China is much less accommodating, viewing these debts as, if not a way for them to make money, essentially, than a way for them to really extend their strong power. And there are examples for where China has been able to go in and essentially had countries turn over ports to them as a result of the fact that these countries were unable to pay back debts that were due to China. As we all know, there was recently a meeting of the G20, the group of the 20 most developed economies in the world, and all of them, except for one country, agreed that there needs to be efforts to try to address this potential crisis in the third world. And the country that did not agree, of course, is China. So that kind of creates a difficult situation here where is the United States going to have to step in and kind of help some of these countries? We're in a world right now where Americans more and more don't want to be involved in some of these foreign expeditions. But yet again, we are interconnected. I mean, if for example, the Middle East or Africa descends into chaos, then that's going to be something that's going to have a critical impact upon our strategic interests. And so, as a result of that, the United States needs to be kind of looking around the world and looking for opportunities where we're able to help these countries restructure their debts in a way that they're able to manage them without them descending into total chaos like we saw happen in Sri Lanka recently.
And Michael, last question for you here with just a few more minutes left today. In Russia, their economy continues to be significantly impacted by their invasion of Ukraine, and in particular, the Putin government is really working on tightening up the price of oil in their country to really focus it on supplying the war machine going toward Ukraine. How is that affecting their efforts in Ukraine, and B, overall affecting that economy? And where's Russia at? Because another major economy on the economic scale.
It is for sure. And this is really one of the untold success stories, I think, for the United States over the past couple of years in terms of our assistance to Ukraine. You know, we've all heard about the billions that we've given of aid, of weapons, and, the HIMARS, everybody talks about that we've given to Ukraine. But one of the biggest impacts that we've had has been the sanctions that we've imposed upon the Russian economy. These sanctions have been really unprecedented historically. In part, for example, where the Russian government had billions of dollars essentially held in the Federal Reserve Bank, and in an unprecedented move, we said to the Russians, "Guess what? We're going to basically take away those funds from you. We're not going to let you use those funds." It was really quite a shock to the Russians when that happened, and as a result of that, they've really been struggling to keep their economy on a good footing. Well, the big advantage that they've had, of course, is that they're a major oil producer. And when oil prices were high, even though much of the world was shying away from buying oil from them, China and India were not. And they were buying oil from them, albeit at a discount, but still with oil prices at a relatively high level, they were still making enough money that they were able to support their war machine. Well, as it turns out, since the price of oil has dropped, suddenly the Russian economy is struggling. Now, that's on top of the fact that our sanctions have resulted in them not having access to kind of a lot of the high technology equipment that they need, and the semiconductors that they need to be able to build the smarter weapons that are more common on today's battlefields. But also, it's just made it harder for them to be able to turn their economy into the war-producing machine that they want it to be. Vladimir Putin has basically turned his whole government, despite his claims that, oh, this is not a war, this is just a special military operation. He's turned his whole government and focused it on trying to replace the losses that they've incurred on the battlefields in Ukraine. And they've tried to increase, for example, the production of tanks and that type of thing. But they're dealing with a large number of workers who have fled the country as a result of this war. Especially the workers who fled this country tend to be more well-educated. They tend to be younger. They're really the valuable employees that Russia needs to be able to run its economy well. And then on top of that, the United States and its allies just agreed on a price cap for oil sold by the Russians. The price cap is going to be at $60 a barrel. Now, right now, they're selling their oil for less than that. But if the price of oil goes up, we intend to use the fact that most of the oil is shipped using either insurance or shipping companies that are licensed here in the West. And what we're going to do is basically say that we're not going to transport any oil that is sold for more than that. Now, why $60 is a valuable number is because it's higher than the price that we believe it costs Russia to produce oil, which we believe is at about $40 a gallon. But it's less than the price that Russia needs to be able to balance its budget, which we believe is about $70 a gallon. So what it'll mean is Russia will continue to produce oil. They need to because they'll be making money on it, but they're not going to be making enough money to balance their budget and continue the war. So the hope is that these economic sanctions now will continue to kind of press down on the Russian economy and really encourage Russia to finally bring an end to this terrible war that's going on in Ukraine.
Michael, thanks for joining us and telling us more about all these different factors that are affecting our economy, as well as economies across the world, that this inflation crisis, the current economic situation that we're in, and that continues to vary in many different ways, both here in the U.S. having some significant effects, but really also really severely affecting countries in developing nations, as well as some of our rival countries like Russia as well. Thank you very much.
Great to be here. Thanks, Tyler.